Inshallah, while they're setting up something real quick here, just wanted to mention a quick reminder about the significance of being a part of a masjid, being a part of learning circles, being connected to the faithful in the Muslim community, and how significant and important it is, and the blessings of that. I'm just going to mention one hadith, all right, before we actually get started, inshallah. And it's a very important hadith. It's actually one that in a few days we'll be covering, or in the coming weeks. But it shows the importance of learning, but not simply or specifically as an individual personal endeavor, but more specifically as a community with other believers, with other Muslims, with other mu'minun and mu'minat. And in it, the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions also about where that takes place. So he says, مَجْتَمَعَ قَوْمٌ فِي بَيْتٍ مِّن بُيُوتِ اللَّهِ يَتْلُونَ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ وَيَتَدَارَسُونَهُ بَيْنَهُمْ إِلَّا نَزَلَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ السَّكِينَةُ وَغَشِيَتْهُمُ الرَّحْمَةُ وَحَفَّتْهُمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ وَذَكَرَهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي مَنْ عِنْدَهُ فَمَنْ بَطَأَ بِهِ عَمَلُهُ لَمْ يُسْرِعْ بِهِ نَسَبًا. So the Prophet ﷺ, may Allah be pleased with him, he mentions that there isn't a gathering or group of believers that come together in one of the houses from the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he didn't just say anywhere, but he said specifically now where? Where, y'all? In the house of Allah, in the masjid. Right? And one of the things that's really important to remember about the masjid is that it's just that. It is the house of Allah. It's not mine. It's not yours, irrespective of who the imam is, irrespective of who runs the masjid, irrespective of who the predominant ethnic group might be at that masjid, irrespective of who bought the masjid, irrespective of whose name is on the deed or the title of the masjid. It belongs to whom? Everybody? Allah. It belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which makes all of us guests. Everybody who walks through the doors of the masjid, no matter who they are a guest. And then maybe you could say there's somebody outside of that who's not a guest. Then the only other thing that they possibly could be is a steward of the masjid. They take care of the masjid, which means they have the honor of taking care of the guests of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's it. So you're one of those two. But ultimately, even them, in reality, they're guests of Allah, and they're simply serving the other guests of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's number one. And he says, there doesn't come a group of believers in one of the houses from the houses of Allah, yatluna kitab Allah. And when they come, it's not to come to, for voting, it's not to come for some type of agenda, but they come to recite, to study, to learn, to memorize, to read, to discuss the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So they read it and they recite it and they study it and they teach one another, right? And they try to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through His glorious book. يَتْلُونَ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ وَيَتَدَارَسُونَهُ بَيْنَهُمْ. So not simply memorization. And then after that, 4 things occur when they come together and do that. When they come together as a communal endeavor to learn and to benefit so that they can be on the same page about their faith, about their values, about their identity, about what it means to be Muslims, to learn that and to reinforce it. To reinforce it, strengthen and bolster it, 4 things happen for that community. Right? He says, إِلَّا نَزَلَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ السَّكِينَةُ. Tranquility descends upon them. Something that every single person in this room right now, myself included, and every human being, everybody wants is sakina, tranquility. Everybody wants that. And everybody in here, I am sure, there's something that every single one is going through in one way or another. It might be a sickness, Might be an illness, might be anxiety, it might be bills, it might be trying to get my wife, it might be trying to get a husband, it might be trying to get married, it might be trying to have children, it might be trying to raise my children, it might be debt that I'm dealing with. Whatever it might be, everybody's dealing with something. Everybody's dealing with something, right? However, when you learn the book of Allah and you learn the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? The Prophet ﷺ says that in that process, tranquility will descend upon you. Now there's different ways that that's manifested in the life of a believer, but that's for another time. But sakina is number one, tranquility, which every one of us need. وَغَشِيَتَهُمُ الرَّحْمَةِ. And then on top of that, they are engulfed and enshrouded and wrapped up in the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And know for sure, brothers and sisters, none of us can ever do enough good deeds to warrant us getting into paradise. It's not like that. It's not that I prayed, over the span of a lifetime, I prayed 10,000 prayers. Okay, I've met the quota to be able to get into paradise. Or I've fasted so many Ramadans, I've met the quota to get into paradise. It's not like that. The key to paradise, the thing that will allow you to step your feet into paradise, and only this thing, is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So much so that even the Prophet ﷺ, when he was asked about this, they said, وَلَا أَنْتَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. Not even you, O Messenger of Allah. And remember, he's the best of creation. He said, أَنَا أَتْقَاكُمْ لِلَّهِ. I'm the most God-fearing of amongst you. أَنَا أَعْلَمْ بِاللَّهِ. I'm more knowledgeable and aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who he is, his rights, and fulfilling those rights. He's Khalilullah, the close, intimate friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said what? He said, وَلَا أَنَا. He said, not even me. إِلَّا أَن يَتَغَمَّدَنِي اللَّهُ بِرَحْمَتِهِ. Except that Allah enshrouds me and engulfs me in his mercy. And when you're engaged communally in reciting, learning the book of Allah, aside from getting tranquility, another thing that you get, another benefit of you coming, inshallah, today and continually doing something like this, is also the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَحَفَّتْهُمُ الْمَلَائِكَةِ. And then the third thing is that they are surrounded by the angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that means, brothers and sisters, and this is part of our belief, and the belief of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, is that right now there are angels around us. There are angels, right? And the Prophet, peace be upon him, he describes in other hadith that they actually scour the earth looking for gatherings where people are remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when they find one, when they find a group of people or someone mentioning Allah, praising Allah, reading Quran, praying, etc., when they find that, they call other angels to come. And then those angels start to come and they become so crowded with each other that they start stacking up on one another. And then they keep stacking up. So think of like a silicone, right? And they stack up all the way up to paradise. Because unlike us who have free will, they only live to worship and praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's it. They don't eat, they don't sleep, they don't drink. Their only reason they exist and all they care and think about is praising, worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whenever they hear that, whenever they see that, they come to it like moths to a flame. And so that means right now, for us, brothers and sisters, that is what we have right now, is that there are angels all around us. وَذَكَرَهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي مَنْ عِنْدَهُ. And the fourth thing is that the Prophet ﷺ, he says that when you come, and you put in that effort, and you laced up your shoes, and you put up your hijab, and you got ready, and you made whatever necessary preparations, and then you drove to the masjid, and you came to the masjid, or you walked to the masjid, and you sat down, and you listened, and you took that time, right? The other thing that you get is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions you by name amongst the chief angels, right? Because the angels that are with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? The angel Jibreel, Mikael, Israfil, right? The greatest of the angels, the leaders of the angels, right? And so subhanallah, that would mean simply showing up, being present, not only at this gathering, but anytime you come to a gathering like this, that means Allah is mentioning you by name. That means Jibril would know your name. That means Mikael would know your name. Israfil would know your name. Simply because you took a little bit of time out of your day, right, to learn, benefit, and grow in your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And really that last one should be enough for us to want to be a part of and continually doing something like this, right? Whether it's this particular halaqah or a halaqah elsewhere, so long as it's the house of Allah and revolves around learning, studying, and improving and growing in your deen, right? And then the Prophet ﷺ, he puts a little dose of reality in there. He says, "Man bata'a bihi amaluhu lam yusri' bihi nasaba." That whoever is slowed down by doing good deeds, like that's too much for you, right? It's too hard for you to do good deeds. You can't do enough good deeds. Know for sure you will not be advanced on the day of judgment because of your lineage or your heritage or who you're related to or who you're connected to. You know, because you know how sometimes in the dunya, right, because you know somebody, they might help you be able to get a job. You know somebody, they pushed your paperwork in and you got into that college, you got that scholarship, you got that whatever, you got that business deal, whatever it might be, even you, whatever. That happens in the dunya. On Yawm al-Qiyamah, your lineage, your tribe, who you're related to, none of that matters to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The only currency that is accepted on Yawm al-Qiyamah is your good deeds. Best. That's it. Who you knew, who your cousin was, your auntie, your uncle, mom, dad, grandfather was a mufti, none of that matters on Yawm al-Qiyamah, right? And so, I just wanted to remind myself and to remind all of you brothers and sisters, right? How important it is to not simply once in a while, not once every 3 months, right? But consistently, right? That you have some kind of ongoing learning of the religion in your life. Because you're always going to have questions. You're always going to have some issue. There's always going to be something that you need to know. Or maybe you need to, so that you can be a source of benefit. Maybe you know and somebody else doesn't, and you being present in their life, now you can share with them. You can say, this is what I know. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said here, or this is what the Prophet ﷺ, or this is what the scholar said, or this is the best thing. Or you can give them some Islamically inspired good advice. It may not necessarily always be, Allah said, His Messenger said. It might just be some good, sound, level-headed advice that has an Islamic perspective. So we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He bless this community, that He bless all of you that are here today, right? That He bless you with sakina, tranquility, and the mercy of Allah, and that He constantly surrounds you by His angels, and that He mention us by name in this life and in a better gathering in the hereafter. Ya Rabbal Alameen. So as for the hadith that we're covering today, inshallah, I would have had how far along on the slide, but Qaddar Allah, due to some technical difficulties, inshallah, you're just going to have to bear with me, my voice. If you have the book, alhamdulillah, follow along. It's hadith number 35. Otherwise, inshallah, just be patient. So, عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم لا تحاسدوا ولا تناجشوا ولا تباغضوا ولا تدابروا ولا يبيع بعضكم على بيع بعض وكونوا عباد الله إخوانا المسلم أخو المسلم لا يظلمه ولا يخذله ولا يكذبه ولا يحكره التقوى ها هنا ويشير إلى صدره 3 مرات بحسب امرئ من الشر أن يحكر أخاه المسلم كل مسلم على مسلم حرام دمه وماله وعرضه رواه مسلم. So in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ narrates some of the most important and fundamental things that eat away at community. So I want you to pay attention closely as we go through them before we explain, all right? So the hadith is narrated or told to us by Abu Hurairah. So think of like if somebody was telling a story, they're the storyteller, right? But in this case, they're narrating or telling us what they heard or observed from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's the point of why every time when we hear a hadith, they always mention the narrator of the hadith, the person who either heard it or saw it or observed from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All right. So in this case, it's Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu who said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Do not envy one another, and don't inflate prices. Don't inflate them artificially over one another, and do not hate one another, and do not turn away from one another, and do not undercut one another in trade, but rather be slaves of Allah and brothers amongst yourselves. A Muslim is a brother of a Muslim. He does not oppress him, nor does he fail him, nor does he lie to him, nor does he hold him in contempt. At-taqwa is right here." And the Prophet ﷺ, when he said that, he pointed to his chest 3 times. Right? And he said, "It is evil enough for a man to hold his Muslim brother in contempt, to scorn him. And the whole of a Muslim is inviolable, meaning they should be untouchable. You should never cross this line. In what way? Inviolable for another Muslim in his blood, his property, and his honor." And this hadith was collected in Sahih Muslim. So the general lesson of this hadith and the importance and significance of this hadith is the Prophet ﷺ talking about the significance and the importance of brotherhood and sisterhood and fraternity between the believers. That this is something that is a fundamental part and aspect of our faith and our belief as Muslims. It is not something that I can do these other parts of Islam, but me getting down with, dealing with, working with, being cordial with, respectful to the other Muslims, I don't have to do that part because they're not from my country, or because they're not from my ethnic group, or because they don't live in the same neighborhood, they don't have the same social status and the wealth. We live in this area and they live in an area where it's for the poor people. This is something that is antithetical to Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us this. And this is throughout the Quran and throughout the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And oftentimes, not only is it teaching us, like what is teaching us in this hadith, that there are things that we are supposed to avoid and not do, they also teach us the things that we're supposed to do, right? That we're supposed to rectify between each other when brothers or sisters or groups of Muslims fight or have some type of conflict or issue, that we're supposed to, be merciful to one another, kind to one another, honest to one another, right? And so those things are taught. And this hadith is not the end all about what we're supposed to not do when it comes to brotherhood and sisterhood, but it is some of the most fundamental things that often occur between people and that should be avoided, to the utmost. So the first thing the Prophet ﷺ says is La tahasadu, right? And does anybody know here what hasad is? I translated as envy, right? And that's usually what it translated as, envy or jealousy. But can anybody explain what that means? What does that mean to have envy of someone else or to be jealous of someone else? Go ahead, Sheikh. What was that?
When somebody, let's say for example, person A is rich or whatever, and the other person doesn't, he's envious of that person because he's got more than he has.
Okay, so he's envious. So you use the word that I asked the definition for. You want to tell us, what do you mean that he's envious of that person who's got more money?
Yeah, he's jealous. He's not jealous, but he's kind of, the inner feeling is not the same as, he wants to have something that person has. He wants to have something that, I wish he did not have all that because I don't have it.
Okay, there you go. So you said that he wants what that other person has. I heard that in there. And then not only that, you want him to not have because you don't have. Okay, so yes, both of those would be, they're actually different degrees of hasad, right? Or different levels of being envious of somebody. Anybody else though? Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. Jazakallah khair. Does anybody else want to take a crack at what does hasad mean? And I'm sure y'all have heard that one time or another. Huh? Oh, this now. What's the word for envy in Somali? I want to say hasad, but I don't think that's the word.
It's hasad.
It is hasad? Hasad? Okay, so I know some of y'all know what that word was. What does that mean in Somali? What would you translate it in English? And don't say envy and don't say jealousy. Huh?
Envy and jealous, that's what the word I know.
I know, but explain it like you were explaining to your 7-year-old son. How would you tell him? What does that mean?
Like hasad, that's his name, right?
إلى آخر الكرسي. Heavy. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, brother.
So Sheikh, I think there is two ways to look at it. There's like wanting what that person has,
Yes.
and there is some wishing that that person loses what he has, right?
No.
And my understanding is, the way I was taught,
Mhm.
is that wishing what that someone has is okay, that's good. And if it's wishing that that person loses what he has, that is hasad.
Okay. MashaAllah. So it would be ghibba so long as it's something good and in the deen. That's ghibba. If it's not, بالعربي
العربي يا
فضلي.
انه بس يعني ما بيحبوا الحاجه اللي بدها كويسه
مرة أخرى عيد مرة أخرى.
الحاجه اللي بدها الحاجه السمحه
أيوة.
يعني ما بيحبوا عليك يعني ما حد الحاجه الله بدها سمحه النعمه انا اعمل حاجه كويسه
نعم.
ما بيحبوا
أيوة. نعم صح. So all of those things. So he added another element of when there's actually a time that it's okay to be, quote unquote, envious of somebody, right? Which is what you added there, Wissam. Jazakallah khair. But right now, we just want to focus on hasad that is not allowed, period, which, alhamdulillah, you mentioned now. So essentially, it's for you to dislike. It's for you to dislike that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed somebody else with something. That you dislike that Allah has blessed someone else with a blessing, or they have something, whether it's material, dunyawi, some material thing, whether it's a car, a house, children, wife, husband, status, whatever. That's a blessing from Allah, and you don't like that they have it, right? Or even if it's diniya, even if it's a religious blessing. So, for example, somebody has knowledge. Somebody is, mashallah, very committed to, their ibadah and their worship, or etc. Like, you have a problem with that, right? Now, it doesn't and not only that, it does not necessarily mean that you don't want them to even necessarily have it, or that you have to have it. It's essentially you're just being a hater. I just got a problem with the fact that they got it. It doesn't have to be that they have it and I want it and I don't want them to have it. It could just be that you have a problem with the fact that they have it at all. Do y'all understand that? You just don't like the fact that somebody else got some blessing. How come he got it? It doesn't even have to be that I want it. I just don't like that he has it. I just don't like that she got it. I just don't like that somebody else got something. Right? And what in today's parlance, that would just be a what? That was just a hater. Right? And this is something that is not permissible in Islam, right? This is not something you should be, a character you should have, but specifically in regards to your Muslim brothers and sisters. It's this, because what we're talking about right now are the rights of Muslims. We're talking about within the Muslim community, that you should not do this, right? But it goes down to say, the Sheikh, he goes on to say, فمتى كرهت ما أعطاه الله أخاك من النعم فهذا هو الحسد. So long as you don't like that they have a blessing, that's it. And then there's degrees. I don't like that they have it, and not only that, I want it. Tell you, that's one level. Then there's another level. Now I have that feeling. I don't like that they have it, and I want it, but I don't do nothing about it. I just, just every time I see them, I fantasize. Like, I wish I had that. You know what I'm saying? Man, if I had the chance, I would do X, Y, and Z. I'd do this to them, or I'd take them, right? But you don't do anything about it. Another level would be that you go out of your way. Let's say, for example, you're somebody at work, right? Somebody at work, and y'all, and they got a raise or they got a promotion, and you undermine them and you undercut them by talking about them because you're mad that they got a promotion and you don't like it, and so you talk about them with whoever promoted them, and you talk bad about them or negatively about them and say certain things to try to get that blessing taken away from them, right? And the same thing could happen at school. Somebody got some type of status, or it could happen on a sports team. Somebody was made captain and you weren't. And you're like, all right. Then you actively go out of your way to try to get that blessing removed from them, right? And so these are one of the things that fray at the Muslim community, because what happens is, number one, it's a spiritual sickness, right? And when we say spiritual sickness, meaning this is one of the first sins that ever happened, if not the first sin that ever happened. Do y'all know who that's in reference to? Adam and Eve. Okay, their story, but who? Habil and Qabil. Yes, that is one of the times that it happens in the Quran. That is jealousy and envy. But even before that, with Iblis. My fault if you raise your hand. But with Iblis, right? And look at what it caused him to do. Right? It started with him because remember, Iblis, na'udhu billah minhu, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from him, right? Where was he? For those of you who know the story, where was he? He was in Jannah. And why was he in Jannah? Because he was righteous. But he wasn't just like normal righteous. What caused him to be, because what is he originally? He's a jinn. Kana min al-jinn. That's what Allah says in Surah Al-Kahf. Alright. So what's he doing up in Jannah? Who's normally in Jannah? The angels. What's he doing up there?
He's good at the time.
Not just good. He's so good in his worship. He's such a devout, ardent worshiper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he's like the angels. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevates him all the way to there. And then when Adam alayhi salam, who essentially, for all intents and purposes, is like the new kid on the block. Allah just made him. Shaitan has been worshiping Allah, or Iblis has been worshiping Allah for Allah knows how long. He's been worshiping, praying to the extent that Allah elevated him here. Allah just made Adam right now. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blew his ruh into him. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught him all the names, right, of everything. Right? He just got here. He hasn't even lived life yet. He hasn't even done any good. The only thing he did is that Allah told him, tell these angels, right, the names of all these things. That's all he did. And now all of a sudden, Shaitan, and that's a blessing from Allah, that Allah taught him those things. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses him even further and grants him that out of honor and respect, not out of worship, that the angels have to prostrate and bow down to our father Adam. And because Iblis is there amongst the angels, he's given the same command. So Shaitan is like, nah, that's not right. That don't make no sense. أنا خير منه خلقتني من نار وخلقته من طين. He said, you created me from fire and you created him from clay. He's saying my very essence, I'm intrinsically better than him just because of who I am and what I'm made out of. I'm better than him. And it's that, and you making me bow down to him now, right? And all of this is because of arrogance, because of envy. Look at how Allah is honoring him, right? In a way, and he's blessed. That's a blessing. To have the angels bow down to him, to have Iblis have to bow, that's a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that don't sit right with shaitan. But what does that cause him to do now? This hasad, or excuse me, first the arrogance, but now this hasad and this envy, what does he do? He vows to wage an eternal struggle against Adam and all of his progeny, which is you and me, that he's going to do everything that he can to make sure that they don't go to Jannah. Because of what? Because of envy. Because he doesn't want he doesn't want him to have that. Do y'all understand that? So now, if somebody's envious of another Muslim, that person, you're being like shaitan. No? And so this is the first thing, which by the way, there are 9 things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions in this hadith that we're supposed to avoid. And hasad is the first one. Right? So in general, the definition of hasad is to simply not like that someone else has a blessing from Allah. And then it can go into more. It could be that you don't want, not only do you not want, but you want it for yourself. That's the default, brothers and sisters, that we should avoid that. The default is, my brother is safe from me for that. However, there are times when you can be envious of someone. But it's not, and we would say envy or jealousy in English, but in Arabic, the word is ghibta. So there are actual instances where you can be jealous of someone. And I think someone said the example of money, Ustad Rona, yeah? Somebody else is rich. If that person is wealthy and they use their money for good causes, to build wells, to build masajid, to take care of orphans, widows, to support the community, etc. They use their money in a manner that's pleasing to Allah. In that instance, for you to say, man, I wish I had money like that guy, so that I can do the things that he's doing, so I could use it for good, the way that he's using it for good. In this instance, that is okay. The Prophet ﷺ specifically mentions that. He also mentions another example of someone who has knowledge, right? And knowledge of the deen, of course, and that causes them to, right, pray during the day, pray during the night. That person, right, who's utilizing and using their knowledge, not just simply that they're a repository and they have a bunch of knowledge, but they implement it, then it's okay to say, I wish I was like that person, and to be envious of that person, so to speak. Right? But the default is no envy between the Muslims. And then we go on, وَلَا تَنَاجَشُوا. The second thing that the Prophet ﷺ warns us against is artificially raising prices when you're selling things. So an example of this would be, have y'all ever been to like an auction or like a flea market? Has anybody ever been to an auction or like a flea market? Right? So you have a bunch of people selling stuff. It's a little more open, right? It's not like a brick and mortar store, right? It's going to be open. And let's say, for example, let's say I'm selling MacBooks, all right? I'm selling MacBooks. A customer comes in and they say, I want to buy that MacBook from you for $1,000, all right? Now, because it's a flea market or like an auction, right? Are the prices fixed? The prices are not fixed, right? It can go up, can go down. Let's say I have a guy who he comes in, and me and him have an understanding, and he's gonna say, hold on, that guy said he'll buy it for 1,000. I'll buy it for 1,100. The person who originally came in, the original customer, he really wants the computer. He says, all right, fine, I'll buy it for 1,150. The other guy says, the guy who's working with me, me and him, we're up to something. He says, fine, I'll do it for 1,300. What is he doing? He keeps doing what? Raising the price. But he has no intention of buying it. He's only doing that to benefit me, the seller. And it's hurting who? The person who really wants to buy it. So now we're artificially raising the price on him. And this, for Muslims, is haram to do. Now, you might not be at a flea market, you might not be at a whatever, but you might be like on, you know what I'm saying, maybe on, what is it, like Facebook, what's that place? Marketplace. Or you might be between, you know, some other friends or somebody that you know or your neighbor, and you want to sell your car. Sometimes people do that. They'll say, the car, I'm going to sell this car, and somebody tells you, I'll give you $5,000 for it. Well, you'd be like, well, I got somebody here who will buy it for $5,500. But he don't have nobody. Wait, he just saying that to do what? To raise the price. Y'all understand that? And this to do against your Muslim brother or sister is haram, because you're cheating them. How you gonna say somebody's my brother, my sister? And when you say brother and sister, what does that word mean, y'all? That means y'all are what? Close. Not just close, you're what? Your family. How you gonna cheat your family for some money? For a few dollars, right? That's you showing that you value money, dunya, material things, more than you value your relationship with your Muslim brother or sister. That's essentially what it is. And because of that, it eats away at your relationship with them, and it eats away at brotherhood and sisterhood, and ultimately community. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ forbade this. So that's najish. And I don't know a one-word translation for that, so we'll just call it artificially raising the price. And then the third thing, the Prophet ﷺ says, وَلَا تَبَاغَدُوا. وَلَا تَبَاغَدُوا. And tabaghud means to not have like hatred, to not scorn. No, not scorn. To have hatred. To have hatred of your brother or sister. And this is something that is obviously contrary to Islam. Because between the Muslims, right, they should have love between one another. Right? And bughd is like the opposite of that. Right? And this plays out in marriages. This plays out with families. This is not just talking about your brother or sister like that you see at the masjid or that you saw at an Islamic event. Right? This means for all of the Muslims. It's for all of the Muslims that you're not supposed to have hatred of them. Right? And this is something, unfortunately, that the Muslims, you know, sometimes become also plagued with. So for example, somebody is of a different madhab. Somebody is of a different understanding. I've even heard of Muslims who, from different political parties, right, having bughd, right, and hatred towards other Muslims, right? And this is something that's haram. The default is you're not supposed to have hatred and a distancing yourself and a turning away from your Muslim brothers and sisters. There are times when there is bughd. The default, however, is that there shouldn't be. But there are times where there is. Because there's something called al-wala and bara in Islam. Right? Al-wala and bara, which is a fundamental aspect of Islam, is actually a fundamental aspect and part of and practice and understanding of Tawheed, is that there is a hatred for kufr, disbelief, right? That is something that is there. And if someone was to do something that would warrant that you have some type of animosity and hatred towards them, right? For example, if they were to disrespect Islam, you're going to say that I love this brother for the sake of Allah, or I love this sister for the sake of Allah, right? No, we have a distancing from that. And if you look at it, even Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, with his father and his people, right? He said what? إِنَّنِي بَرِيءٌ مِّمَّا تَعْبُدُونَ إِلَّا الَّذِي فَطَرَنِي فَإِنَّهُ سَيَهْدِينِ. He said, I'm free from y'all. I ain't got nothing to do with you and whatever it is that you worship. I have nothing to do with that. We're not friends no more. We're not family no more. We're not community no more because of your kufr and your shirk, because of your disbelief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? When it comes to dealing with the Muslims, that the default is you're not supposed to have animosity for them. You're not supposed to have hatred for them, right? This is because, again, that's a little more clear and obvious that it frays and eats away at, you know what I'm saying, the community. وَلَا تَدَابَرُوا. And what that means is it literally means to turn your back on someone, right? This is something that you shouldn't do to Muslims. And how that would play out is you have an argument or a falling out with a brother or a sister, right? You have a falling out with a brother or sister, and you don't talk to them for a few days, right? Now, that happens. But the Prophet ﷺ said, you should not abandon your brother or sister. You should not, tadabaru, you shouldn't turn your back on them, fawqa thalath, more than 3 days, right? You shouldn't do so for more than 3 days. That's plenty of time for things to cool down, for level heads to prevail, right? And then you should make sulh. You should rectify. You should fix things between you. You should call that brother. You should text that sister. Obviously, we're talking about sisters communicating with sisters and brothers communicating with brothers when I say that. But to be clear. Or with family, especially things with family. Now, that's the default, is that there should be no turning your back on your brothers and sisters. Right? If they need your help, if they need your assistance, if they need something, you should be there for them. They should be able to trust that they can depend on you, that you're going to help them. You should not turn your back on them. Yes?
What about like if you just distance yourself from a person because of the kind of business they got, the things they do with their business ain't right. If you don't want to get tied in with that person doing in that business, so how does that work? Or you sleep with the politicians. Like you got some of the politicians that practice LGB stuff.
Yep.
Still, you look at that person in a different way, or how do you look at that person?
So when we mentioned about hatred, right, or having some type of distancing and animosity, right? We said if the default is that you don't do that to the Muslims, but if they're doing something that warrants it, then of course I hate that act, and we hate them to the level and to the extent relative to what they're doing. So if they're supporting this, I can't support you. I can't help you in this. Matter of fact, I have to distance myself from you, right? Because you're doing that, right? And if they continue and they're obstinate and they, dig their heels in, so to speak, right? Then khalas, you can't support them. So what we're talking about in general is the default, and then there are exceptions. So for example, we said, the Prophet ﷺ said you shouldn't abandon your brother or sister for 3 days, more than 3 days, right? And that if you do come back together, the one who gives the salams first, the one who initiates that coming back together and the rectifying and reconciliation, they're the better of the two. Scholars mention there are exceptions. So for example, between a husband and a wife, or between family, or because of something happening and you're trying to, right, because typically you distancing yourself, not communicating or whatever, that's usually out of some type of I don't want to say discipline, but it's like to bring their attention to something. Like they're doing something wrong, and I'm distancing myself from you, and we're not talking, right? Because of what you're doing. I talked to you about this. You keep doing this. Khalas, I'm not talking to you. And that's mentioned in the Quran, right? That you're supposed to talk to them, remind them. If they don't, then you leave them, and you're not supposed to, right, sleep in the same bed in the same room with them, right? That's an exception where they would say that could be more than 3 days. Or if it happens to be with family or something like that. But the default is what? That you don't. The default is that I'm there for my brothers, right? But if they're doing something wrong, then you don't support them. Matter of fact, you supporting them, and we'll come to that, is you making an earnest attempt to try to get them to stop whatever that is. That's wrong. But if they don't, then that's when it's warranted, I feel, that you got to take a step back. You know? طيب تباغضوا ولا تدابروا ولا يبيع بعضكم على بيع بعض. And that as far as is to interfere in somebody's transactions. So you're not supposed to interfere. So again, we'll use the example, I'm selling a car, all right? And let's say I have a car and I sold it to somebody. I sold it to them, all right? Khalas, they bought it and they were leaving, okay? Let's say we were out in the parking lot here. I sold somebody a car, and as they were leaving, somebody else had a car for sale too. And they said, hey, I have a similar make and model, I have a similar car, all right? Go back and give that car back to him, and I'll sell you the same car, right, for a little bit cheaper. But I already sold the car, he already gave me the money, we already had our contract or whatever, it's done, right? But he saw him later on and said, hey, it's only been like 1 day. Just go back, give him back the car, give him his money back, and I'll sell it to you for cheaper. Now he's interfering with my transaction that's already done. But he convinces that person because that guy doesn't want to miss out on a hookup. He doesn't want to miss out on a deal. That is haram, right? Now somebody might say, well, what about when you're in the market? If anybody's ever done business or whatever, and you see people saying, hey, come look at my stuff, or hey, come buy my wares. If y'all ever been to like a bazaar, that's like the closest you can probably get to in like at an Islamic convention or something. You have all those different little booths and stuff, and there's people like right next to each other. Sometimes they're selling the same thing, and they're like, hey, come look at our stuff. Hey, come smell our, perfume or our attar or our cologne, or hey, come take hey, you can have a free sample if you come over here. That's not wrong. That's okay. That type of competition and that fierce competition, I'm trying to think of where would be another example. Anybody made Umrah or Hajj? Yeah, when you go to the market there, or no, that's not what I'm thinking of, because it's the same thing. If you go to the mall, if you go to the, everybody knows it, it's the Somali mall, that's what it does, right? That's also very similar, right? You'll have like 4 or 5 booths where they're selling like hijabs and abayas. Or you have 4 or 5 different booths where they're selling sambusa and shah and whatever, right? Now, if a guy is standing in front of his booth or in front of his store shop, and he's telling people, come to my shop. Hey, come over here. We got the best prices. Come over here. We got the best tasting shah in town. Come over here. We got the best abayas, whatever, right? And then the other person, right, instead of people going to the person who's kind of sitting there and being quiet, right, and they start coming to mine, does that mean I'm interfering with their transactions? No, it doesn't. That's just business. But if somebody went over there to somebody else, bought something, and then I told them, hey, that's not required. Come buy from me. Just return it to them, and then just come buy mine. Then that's a problem. Does that make sense, y'all? I think it's pretty clear. So we're gonna keep going, inshallah. And then, the Prophet ﷺ, he reminds us of where this should all be rooted in. He said, وَكُونُوا عِبَادُ اللَّهِ إِخْوَانًا. Right? That, listen, he said, all of you, first and foremost, you'll be servants of Allah. He's reminding us of where this is all coming from and why we should be avoiding this in the first place. Is that because you're servants of Allah and you're slaves of Allah. So it might be a personality thing. You might not like somebody who's Muslim. You might not get along with them. You might not be best friends with them. Islam is not telling you got to be best friends with every single Muslim and y'all got to hang out and, and be with each other all the time. That's not what Islam is saying. But they're saying, but this is the bare minimum. That you don't have hatred for your brother or sister. You know what? This brother, he kind of, me and him don't mesh well. But if he said, brother, I need some gas money, can you help me? He should be able to rely on you. If it said, sister says, sister, I need some help with something, it shouldn't be like, I can't stand that sister. No, I'm not going to help her. That's your Muslim sister, right? We didn't say she has to be your BFF, but she has rights on you. And the brothers, they have rights on you. right? Whether it's doing something for them or preventing some harm from them. Now, tell you. And so, of course, that's rooted in us being servants, all being servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a common denominator between us. And then he reinforces that even further in a different way by saying, be servants of Allah and brothers. Right? And Allah tells us that in the Quran as well. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. Allah tells us that you are brothers. He doesn't say you're like brothers. He doesn't say you're similar to brothers, right? Or there's similarities between, Muslim believers and siblings. But he says you are brothers and sisters. Right? That means we're brothers and sisters, whether you like it or not. Accept it. Get used to it. Embrace it. Right? And then give them their due rights. And we keep it moving. He says, Al-Muslimu akhul Muslim. That the Muslim is the brother to a Muslim. Right? And this goes for all of the Muslims. This goes for all of the Muslims without exception. لا يظلمه ولا يخذله. That he doesn't oppress him. Right? He doesn't oppress him. And so this could come out in a couple of ways. Right? One is obviously you take some of their rights, you hurt them, you harm them, you lie to them, or any of these things that you're doing, they have the right to be protected from your harm, but making sure that you don't oppress them in any way. Whether you oppress them in business, whether you oppress them in your relationship, husband, wife, right? Children, brother at the masjid, sister at the masjid, right? Relatives, Muslims overseas who might be struggling. They have rights on us. Sometimes that right, it's not necessarily always financial. For example, it might be you simply making dua. They have that at least from you. But you should never oppress the Muslims in any way, shape, or form. طيب ولا يخذله في مقام يحب أن ينتصر فيه.
Brother?
Yes,
Can I add something about that oppression?
please.
If you don't mind, inshallah, if you don't mind. Oppression in that there are many different ways, different feelings that has been going on. Just give some examples of how Muslims park when it comes to a parking lot, especially when they're coming to the masjid. Double parking. They're oppressing. By not allowing, even if they have two doors, the brothers have to sit by that one door, not allowing the sister to go through, that's oppression. In many forms, so basically the way I understand, and please anybody can correct me, the way I see oppression is by making something feel dislike to others. That's the way I see oppression. You're kind of making it feel dislike to someone,
No.
just so that I can get away with it.
I mean, that's very subjective, like somebody not liking something, but it's essentially crossing boundaries. A dhulm is to cross a boundary,
Well, yeah.
right? So like, for example, like you said, the blocking somebody in the parking lot, right? Regardless of whether I like, don't like, or whatever, that is stopping me from leaving. I need to go to work, I need to go somewhere, and a brother or sister's in here talking for like 30, 45 minutes, right? And now I can't get to what I need to do, right? They have, right, oppressed. Now, typically we think of the word oppression, we think of like, big things like slavery and, you know what I'm saying, the criminal justice system or whatever. And yes, it can be these, day-to-day dealings that can be considered like oppression Islamically,
Yeah.
right? No, for sure.
I'm just kind of generalizing the sense that, because there are young people here,
Mm-hmm.
who probably don't have the knowledge of that nature. And some of them are, mashallah, able to live with these things, but, we want to kind of make them aware from smaller things that are within their reach, inshallah.
Inshallah. So oppression would be your brothers or sisters. So yeah, your brother or sister has something that belongs to them. Okay? You take it, you use it, you break it, and you don't replace it. You don't apologize. You don't give it back to them. You don't compensate. Somehow you don't make it right. Huh? That's oppressive. And you did it because you were bigger than them, or you were older than them, or you're the favorite. So even if you told on me, mom or dad's not gonna say nothing anyways, right? That would definitely be, huh? You know what I'm saying? Anything where you are, you know what I'm saying, not giving someone their rights is always oppressive. Now.
Yeah, just like to kind of clarify the definition, for me, oppression is like when someone has a power over someone else, even if it's like little snippets of power. I just want to kind of clear that.
No.
Like he's saying like double parking, like, yeah, you're not the boss of someone's employer, but you have power, you are taking up space, and that's affecting someone. So I just want to kind of clarify, it's like having power over someone and abusing that power, that's it.
No, so that's not, I know that that's not necessarily like an Islamic understanding though, because it's not always power, right? There's not always a power dynamic in you oppressing somebody. So for example, I could be oppressing somebody, when we mentioned the example of like somebody's at work and they got a raise, or they got a promotion rather, and I am talking about them behind their back to basically lower, you know what I'm saying, their status or whatever in the eyes of the other people at my work. That's gonna cause them to lose their employment. I don't have no power. Matter of fact, it's because because I'm not bold enough or whatever, that I'm using in a sneaky, behind the back kind of way. I'm just whispering and talking to people and stuff like that. It's not power, but I'm still oppressing that person because now they lost their position that they may have worked hard for, they earned or whatever. And so that's why Islamically, right, dhulm is an yata'adda, is for you to cross and take somebody's right, or to take some that doesn't belong to you and it belongs to somebody else. So yes, in the parking lot, I'm essentially, that person has the right to be able to move freely. I've removed that right now for them. I've taken that away. You might want to say, but no. And the reason why I caution against using power, because usually that's in reference to things like racism and things like, that type of stuff. But we want to make sure that we use Islamic terms and Islamic definitions when talking about these things, right? Now.
It's prejudice found here?
What's that?
Prejudice, being prejudiced.
Being prejudiced to someone?
Yeah.
Of course. And give an example. Yeah.
If like for example, you go in the right way in the parking lot, and you got people behind you.
Well, there's a lot of problems in the parking lot, huh? Well, it's not.
That's why I saw it happen.
Okay.
So the person got people behind them.
Yeah.
The person's coming the wrong way, but because there are people in the store, they're trying to get everyone to back up and let them through because they feel they got the power because there are people in the store.
Yeah.
But and then the other person jumps out of the car. One person was from America, the other person was from across the bar. He jumped out of the car, so you need to go back to where you came from because of the way you act, you don't need to be here.
Yeah.
That's the situation.
No.
So it ended up being a big old argument because one person kept hollering, you need to go back where you came from, the other person, like, nah, my people own this store, you need to get out the way because my people own this, so move.
No. So, I mean, in that instance, both of them are wrong. Firstly, the person for what they did, trying to get it, blocking the way or trying to get them to, everybody to move for them, that was wrong. But then with them telling them, right? Because look, just apply the hadith, right? One of them is doing something wrong, right? He's essentially curtailing other people's rights. He's making dhulm on them. And then this other person now, he's having hatred for that person. And he's telling him, go back across the park. Who does he sound like when he says that? That's what he sound like. You know what I'm saying? That's like somebody saying, telling black people, go back to Africa. You know what I'm saying? Y'all go back to, so and so. That's what he sound like. But who's he talking to? He's talking to another what? No. You said they're both what?
No, they're different ethnic groups. There's two different.
But they're both what though?
One was American, the other one was from, I can't remember what country.
We don't worry about the country, but they were both what at the end of the day? They weren't both Muslims?
Technically, they're both immigrants.
They wasn't both Muslim though?
They're both Muslims.
That's what I'm trying to get at. It don't matter where they're from. The point though is that both of them is wrong because they both talking to Muslims.
Okay.
So either way, it's you know what I'm saying, what they're wrong.
Okay.
And so of course, prejudice, you know what I'm saying, is not something that we should be having in Islam. No. I mean, look at, regardless of the example that you want to give, remember all of these things are things that we should not be doing with other Muslims as the default, right? But I'm with him. So he says we don't oppress them, and we don't abandon them, right? You don't abandon them in any way. We already mentioned, right, that you're there for them, that you help them, that you aid them and stand with them. وَلَا يَكْذِبُهُمْ أي لا يخبرهم بحديث كذب. And that Muslims, they shouldn't lie to one another, right? And this is something, again, that's obvious. Aslan, the Muslim, shouldn't be lying, period. It's not something that they should be doing at all, right? Again, that's the default. There are instances, for example, where it is allowed. So, for example, in things like war, in things like in marriage, in certain instances, not just as a general, like the general principle, but in certain instances, yes. When rectifying between groups or different parties of Muslims, brothers and sisters, right, to rectify and make sort of between them, that's actually an instance. So, for example, let's say there's two brothers that don't want to see each other, they arguing and fighting, and you mentioned that so-and-so is saying something good about you, right? So that they soften up. And then you say, hey, he's saying something good about you too. And then you try to get them to meet or whatever. But the default is Muslims are honest and truthful, right? Because if you're not, how are you supposed to trust somebody? And out of all the people, you should be able to trust your family. And even more specifically, especially if they claim to be from the faithful, they claim to be believers, they claim to be Muslims. We should be able to trust one another. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he says, وَلَا يَحْتِرُهُ أي لَا يَسْتَهِينُ بِهِ. And this one is to scorn. And this is to essentially, like, you think that you're better than someone else. And something which sounds like what you was talking about a little bit earlier, right? Where this guy thought, because I own this store, I'm better than everybody. Don't you know, my name is on the thing. This is my whatever. And he thinks that he's better than someone because of what? Because of money, because of ownership, right? But what also happens, case in point, where he was saying, go back to wherever you came from. It also could be because of tribe. It could also be because of, you know what I'm saying, country or ethnic group. And I will say this, when I lived in Saudi Arabia, right, you meet Muslims from all over the world. You meet Muslims from all over the world. And there's essentially 3 categories of people that you see. How many did I just say, Ibrahim? 3 categories of people, all right? How many? 3. You see the good, you see the bad,